Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast. I'm Philip Ideson, a 20-year procurement practitioner, former head of procurement, advisor to procurement leaders around the world, and the founder and managing director of Art of Procurement. My team and I work with our global network of subject matter experts to help companies elevate procurement's impact, whether that's through building and implementing transformation programs, sustainably reducing external expenses, or leveraging AOP Mastermind, our learning and development platform for companies of all sizes. You're listening to our flagship podcast, where we pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that leading procurement teams are using to align their results with the needs of the business. The landscape for hiring procurement professionals and for being hired has definitely changed dramatically over the past couple of months. But what does that mean for procurement professionals looking for a new role, or for executives looking to hire the next star? Well, in today's podcast, I share my recent conversation with a longtime friend of the pod, Mark Holyoake. So I'm not sure I've even told Mark this, but he was the very first person to subscribe to Art of Procurement 5 years ago, and someone that I actually first worked with on an open role all the way back in 2006. I think it's the third time that he's been on the podcast. Mark is the founder of Holyoake Search, which is a US East Coast-based procurement recruitment firm, and someone who always has his finger on the pulse of the procurement recruitment market. So I started off the conversation by asking Mark how the recruitment market is holding up in the face of some pretty strong headwinds.
So it's still a bit of a mixed bag out there, but at a macro level, I think there are some observations that I can share based on my day-to-day conversations. Some companies, especially those in the retail, hospitality and travel industries are obviously getting decimated. They're widely impacted by layoffs and furloughs, and my heart goes out to those affected. And if I can help anyone over the coming months as they go through their job search, please, those people should get in touch. A lot of the procurement executives that I've been speaking to outside of the hardest hit industries, though, actually believe that procurement has taken on a more important role than ever at their company. And their teams do feel pretty secure in their jobs right now. And that's obviously great news.
Yeah.
The level of contract recruitment amongst our clients has definitely increased in response to the need to bring expertise into the business short term and in a more flexible manner. And with regards to permanent recruitment, I've actually found that the most senior level searches have been affected the least.
Interesting.
Though there's no question that in general it's slower than normal out there. That being said, honestly, as recently as this past week, I've just started to get the feeling that we're close to turning a corner. Companies have started to move their attentions sort of beyond that initial shock to the system, if you will, and toward the resources that they're going to need to propel themselves forward in the coming months. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
That's positive to hear. That you haven't seen a wholesale grinding to a halt, if you will, of the of recruitment, because you really never know, as we're in this phase of kind of trying to figure out what's next, how that's going to impact different people. And while I think we all agree that procurement has such an important role to play to help, to be part of the solution, that doesn't mean that the budget constraints don't still come along with that. So, that's
for sure.
That's good to hear. And so, as you think about that, one of the things that came to mind as I was thinking about where recruitment has been and where it's going, for procurement folks is, we've talked a lot, and I think you and I have probably talked a lot about the war for talent, the best talent within procurement. Does this kind of the opening up a little bit of the market and the impact that we'll have on a lot of industries, does that mean that that war for talent is over? Or are you going to find that those in-demand skills that were in demand before are still going to be in demand because, frankly, there aren't enough of them around our industry, and so they're just as sought after as ever?
Yeah, good question, Phil. Honestly, I think that remains to be seen. With everything that you read in the news media, your first instinct would be, I think, that war for talent that we've seen over the past 12 or 18 months or more would likely be over. Yeah. The market's been flooded with active job seekers and professionals with an appetite to move into a new job or a new industry that's more stable, at the exact same time that many companies are laying people off or furloughing them en masse, or have, at the very least, slowed hiring down significantly. That being said, if you're a hiring manager with one of these many companies that's placed a temporary hold on hiring, I think you really have to consider how you're going to compete for talent when nearly every company out there hits the play button on hiring again in the next few months. And particularly at the junior to mid-career level, I'm actually inclined to think that the managers will struggle again to find good people unless they are really starting to seriously consider investing in their personal branding and in their interview process.
Now, that's interesting that you talk about that, because I did want to talk about personal branding and kind of personal branding for procurement professionals, but I'm actually going to start by asking, because it's a good segue into personal branding for executives, and the role, the need for an executive to position themselves as being, we've talked a lot about employer of choice, but it's a kind of a boss, an employer in the terms of an individual that you want to go and work for. Is that something that you think is going to be more and more important when we think about hiring the best talent, that folks essentially want to work for the people that have the best reputations, not necessarily the companies that have, the brand, if you will?
Oh, 100%. While many are going to think of personal branding as most applicable to the active job seeker that's looking to distinguish themselves amongst a sea of other candidates, your opportunity here may also be related to talent acquisition. The adage that people leave bosses, not companies, well, that's true, but it goes both ways. People join bosses too, and done well, an investment in personal branding is now going to help you find and access talent that I think you'd never normally be able to. And as I just mentioned, this is amplified when all of these companies suddenly start hiring again at the same time in the coming months, and everybody's competing for the same people. By contrast, if it's done poorly, you're going to pay the cost of a long, drawn-out hiring process and an inability to secure the very best candidates, no question. And I think even more strategically, and I guess I'm rather shooting myself in the foot here, but this all helps. It also helps the procurement officer who's looking to create a sustainable inbound talent acquisition and retention model, not just, like you said, based on the company's brand or their willingness to pay to retain a search firm like mine at a time when they need someone, but based upon their own reputation and that of their team in the industry.
All right, so we talked a little bit about personal branding, certainly in the context for execs, but I think it's something that's really important for all levels of procurement professionals. I know it's something that you talk around a lot, so I just wonder if you could share a little bit about, when we think about personal branding, what does that really mean for a procurement professional?
So the notion of a job for life doesn't really exist anymore, right? Notwithstanding current market conditions, millennials are job hopping more than any other generation before them, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. What it does mean, though, is that your career trajectory and your success in finding meaningful, interesting, challenging work at an ever more senior level, it doesn't hinge just on your ability to do your job well anymore, or your ability to impress those in your immediate orbit, if you will, but much more so on your ability to develop your reputation and put it out there to the world so that others know about you and they're willing to open up doors for you too, right? So personal branding is essentially about controlling the story that people tell about you when you're not in the room. And the thought of branding, I think, or influencers, right? It brings on nausea to some. I get it, but it's not an ego-driven exercise anymore. It's a business imperative.
Right.
If you're in the market for a new job and you're just applying online and putting some feelers out there to your immediate network, and you're doing nothing today with respect to personal branding, it's my belief that you're turning a 2 to 3 month problem related to coronavirus into a 6 to 12 month problem, at least. Your competition's gotten stronger. It's going to take you far longer to find a job. And even if you are gainfully employed, presumably you have ambitions to move up the corporate ladder. And the current situation is going to put those ambitions on hold for a lot longer than it should if you let it. Again, personal branding, it's about radically building the size of your audience, and it's elevating your reputation in the industry in a way that's going to open you up to potential job opportunities that other people are not hearing about. And it's an ongoing process. It involves putting the time in today so that you're in the best possible standing tomorrow.
So what does that look like? When you think about, is it, hey, I need to be going and becoming more vocal or visual or whatever that may be on social media, or sharing some of my thoughts and experiences and things that I've done, in a blog, or trying to make stronger connections with folks that I may be connected to offline. Like when you think about, hey, I'm a procurement professional, I want to invest in myself for my personal branding, I want a stronger personal brand, where do I start?
Sure. Well, I think all of the examples that you gave are great examples, but I think it can seem a bit overwhelming, and if you don't know where to start. So doing something that's systematic, I think is key, and doing something that is authentic is key as well. So let me try to give you some sense of what steps that I'd take. So step one, right? First, you want to figure out what you want to be known for. What makes you you? What are your long-term career intentions? You really should be thinking about these topics semi-regularly anyway, so it shouldn't be that difficult. How do you want to be perceived? Who's your audience, right? Good branding, as I said, it should be authentic. It should be an honest reflection of who you are as a person and as a professional, because the more authentic and the more comfortable you are with your brand, the more likely you are to make sharing a habit, and the more that you share, the more that you reach, okay? Step two is, once you've set those goals and you started giving some thought to who the audience is, you're going to want to decide what you want to share and how often. So what expertise or experience do you have that is going to bring value to others? What do you enjoy talking about that's going to provoke some lively discussion? Like, good shares that get engagement on all of these platforms, they should educate, they should inspire, they should ask questions, they should provoke healthy debate, they should offer a new viewpoint, right? And again, people should draw on their own experiences, and they should feel very comfortable getting some of that knowledge and experience out there, because it's content that people do want to consume, given a chance. Last step, once you know the audience, once you know what you'll be sharing, start to build your following, right? It's increasing your connections. It's getting on the right platforms. And for most people, that means LinkedIn and Twitter. Like, Twitter's where you're going to share your hot trending topics and You're going to follow industry leaders. You're going to hashtag your way into being seen. Probably even more so, though, is LinkedIn. It's even more ubiquitous amongst a lot of procurement professionals, and it's certainly a platform that I personally use a lot. You're going to share larger pieces of information here. So posts, links, shares from other procurement influencers, or articles that you've written and published yourself directly on the platform. The key here is just as with any other relationship, it's frequency, it's consistency, and it's relevance. I think the mistake that most people make is that they think they can cultivate a loyal following just from likes alone. And there is a bigger investment in this than just doing that, but it shouldn't be anything that feels overwhelming. Again, this should be fun. It should be something that comes, quite naturally to you. If this is based upon a subject matter that you enjoy talking to other people about.
Yeah, and just kind of the insider tip there on links, you said on LinkedIn. LinkedIn doesn't really, when you think about expanding your reach, likes don't really mean that much to the LinkedIn algorithm anymore. It's all about engagement. It's all about people commenting. You want to be trying to encourage folks to engage in a conversation with you, because that's what LinkedIn values. That's what keeps people on the LinkedIn platform. And that's what, their algorithm likes, so that they will then go and amplify your voice even further. So getting conversation started, so important.
And I think getting started is the operative word, right? There's a lot of people that are going to think about this and say, well, I'm never going to get as high a profile as other people, right? And well, one, I simply don't think that's true. And if, I think I am, what I have been able to accomplish personally in this regard over the past few months, and the opportunities that has led to for me professionally is testament to that. So I'm happy to talk to anyone about that offline if they have an interest in doing so. But I think what people need to know is that, honestly, some of the most high-profile people on LinkedIn are in the personal branding business themselves, right? They're good at it, sure, but they should be. And you don't need that high a profile in order to accomplish the objectives that we're setting out here. LinkedIn as a platform I think it's ripe for this kind of content development and sharing, and yet very, very few people are really taking advantage of that currently, and that's certainly the case within the procurement community. I genuinely think you have this opportunity to radically build your reputation without an over-investment in your time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as procurement professionals, we're somewhat we've been brought up to think that information may be power, and that whole kind of power dynamics and leverage when it comes to negotiations. And it's almost like we don't want to share things because, well, what if my next potential supplier is watching and they get some tips on how to negotiate against me or something like that? And honestly, I don't know what you feel about that, but I feel that that's kind of, we have to lose that. We have to really start to think more about transparency, relationships, and people wanting to work with us because they know who we are, they know us, as opposed to trying to hide information and being afraid to put ourselves forward, because that may open us up to other things.
No question. And this need not be information that's private and confidential, but this may simply be information that you're accustomed to sharing with others at in-person networking events. And those are not happening right now. Conferences are obviously taking place virtually, but for the time being, if nothing else, personal branding needs to take some place of what you are normally doing, the activity that you're normally spending time on, getting out there in the world and sharing war stories and anecdotes with your procurement peers, because that in turn has always led to some interesting professional opportunities. But in lieu of that, you need to be getting online and sharing that instead.
Yeah. I just, as we kind of close out the conversation on personal branding, there's a couple of things that you talked about that I just wanted to highlight again, to pull out, that I think are so important. And that the first one is the authenticity. And I'll be honest, like when I started the podcast, I don't know it's not that I tried to be somebody that I wasn't, but, for example, I would over edit the conversation. So I didn't sound as though I was somebody who was new to this podcasting game, and I was kind of trying to feel my way through it and figure out what worked and what didn't. And there came a point, maybe it was 6 or 9 months in, I thought, you know what? I've got to be myself. Some people will appreciate that and some people won't appreciate that. And I'm okay with that, because you don't want to set this persona up of somebody that you're not, because then you got to try and live up to that. And you're only setting everybody up for, potential disappointment at that point, because you're painting this picture of you being a person that you're not. So really being authentic, being yourself, really important. And the other thing that you said was consistency. Be there every 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, like we are with the pod, whatever is your date and your time, so that once you start to build up a following or people who are interested in what they say, they're going to look you out. They're not just going to sit and wait and see, well, did Joe post something? Well, I'm just going to wait until I see something come up in my feed. Well, no, they're going to go to his blog and say, I wonder what he's talking about this week. And that's really then how you start to get in front of people and start to build up that trust factor. So I know you mentioned those in kind of the steps, but I think those two things are really important. At least those are things that helped me as I was building the podcast up.
I think it's right. It's a mindset thing. This needs to be an activity that you integrate into your day-to-day, not something that you consider to be something you do if you've got an extra few minutes at the beginning or the end of the day, but something that is driving toward an objective that you have, that is opening you up to opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise be exposed to if you weren't doing this. Take that 20 to 30 minutes a day or 2 to 3 times a week, whatever it is, and build that into your day, into your job search strategy, into your career plan. And if you prioritize it, again, it takes a little bit of time to get up and running, but you will see the results. Yeah. I promise you.
Well, Mike, I know that while I have the opportunity to be speaking to you, there was one other topic area that I just love to touch on right now, because it's something that is definitely impacting organizations today and is most likely going to do for the foreseeable future. And that's coming back to the recruitment process. Obviously, we're not able to do anything in person right now. So all recruitment that is happening, and like you said at the beginning, recruitment is still happening, is all remote. What challenges does that bring? And how do you see both companies and candidates kind of approaching that to overcome the hurdle of, hey, I'm going for a job and I'm never going to meet the person, or I'm going to hire somebody without ever having have met them? Because that's a very different feeling than the typical recruitment process.
Sure. Well, first of all, let's acknowledge that there are some incredibly talented individuals out there in the market who are currently looking for a new job through no fault of their own. And if you can act as a company before others do, I think that presents a potential opportunity for you to attract and retain the services of some incredibly high potential people, or those with a very niche skill set that you might not normally be able to. And that's a wonderful thing. Candidates are prioritizing stability, flexibility, and meaning to their work over salary alone. And if you can speak well to all of these three over the course of the interview process, I think you're going to reap the rewards over the coming years. In terms of the challenges that the companies that are hiring are facing, though, I think the key consideration is the need to adapt the interview process to better suit the current market. And like you said, the fact that most everyone is now working from home and will be for some time to come. It's not just a question of replicating the interview process and then just exchanging in-person interviews with video conferences or phone calls. Right? If that were the case, just polishing your video conferencing skills would be enough. In actuality, you need to think in terms of replicating what each interviewer actually gets out of the experience, and under normal circumstances, that is, and in terms of maximizing the chances that the impression that you're able to leave candidates with is a positive one. And that's more difficult. For example, so video interviews can get pretty complicated when you've got multiple people on the call, right? And the social cues that you would have normally during an in-person interview just aren't there. So you're going to want to talk to some of the other stakeholders that are in the interview ahead of time to determine who's going to run the call, how to effectively take turn asking questions. And moreover, I think hiring managers need to be proactive about addressing the unique circumstances that have created the need for these video interviews in the first place.
Right.
And they've got to humanize that conversation, right? Normally, like you said, a candidate is going to get the chance to check out the office space, get a feel for the vibe of the place, assess how they're greeted by the front desk, meet you physically, consider the dynamic between the various team members that they're meeting. And these factors, these are huge differentiators between two or more otherwise, very similar job opportunities. And you as a company, you have got to figure out how to replace those, or at the very least find a way to sort of address them over the course of the interview. And similarly, candidates, they've got to consider how they need to adapt their approach to nail the interview. They've got to figure out, they've got to discern, whether the company's culture is a good fit for them. They've got to identify any red flags along the way. And they've got to do all of this without the opportunity to meet anyone in person or ever even set foot in the office, knowing that even if they start a job, they're also not likely to ever meet that person physically or set foot in that office or attend a lunch with the team or a happy hour, until months and months into the role. So it's a very sensitive sort of time, and I think it requires some advanced thought, probably more thought than a lot of companies and candidates are giving it at the moment.
Yeah, I feel like never before has first impressions been as important as, start as a hiring manager. Starting the call on time, being there and creating a safe space, not just jumping straight into the questions, but just helping kind of build up that personal human-to-human connection, because your candidate isn't necessarily going to know what to expect when they come on the line. And if you just jump straight into questions, then, it shows that it's a very transactional conversation versus one where you're truly trying to get to know one another. And I think that it's, the power in that conversation does rest with the interviewer to create that space where the interviewee feels comfortable, in being themselves, in being authentic, and not just seeing this as, here's 10 questions kind of thing, and I'm just going to run through these and make it very matter of fact.
Oh, absolutely, Phil. I think that, it's really off-putting, if that's the approach and the attitude that you take. The reality is that all of us, and this includes hiring managers, it includes candidates, right? We're dealing with a lot. Yeah. Again, we may not all be home, but we're dealing with circumstances that we never dealt with before. Many of us are juggling stress in our professional life, stress in our personal life. We're homeschooling kids for the first time on top of full-time jobs or full-time job searches, and to not acknowledge any of that, to not take some time at the beginning of the interview to understand a person just a little bit better, I think is incredibly short-sighted. And so I think there are some accommodations. I think there's every opportunity for people to make a good impression and to prepare for those video conferences in a way that they would prepare for an interview to ensure that they make a positive impression. But I think there's also an obligation to give some allowances to, again, what people are going through, that they're in a less than optimal situation, and that they probably don't want to be taking a video conference interview at home with the kids running around downstairs any more than you want to be interviewing them over video as opposed to having them come into your office either.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mike. Well, I want to thank you so much for your time today, for your guidance on the topics that we talked about on branding and where we are in kind of that interviewing process. I think there's some encouraging words about the state of the recruitment market for those who, are looking for the next opportunity. Obviously, it's a really tough time at the moment. But again, I want to thank you for your time and just ask the last question, which is the easiest question of the day, I think. And that's, if listeners would like to know more, reach out, connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure. If you don't mind, let me just preface that with what I sort of consider to be a call to action here for those people who are listening. The current market conditions that we're seeing are unquestionably causing challenges for job seekers and hiring managers alike. We've talked about this, but we've also talked about the opportunity here to distinguish yourself from the majority of your peers and turn these challenges into a unique opportunity. And I sincerely believe that to be the case. Some of these changes that need to be made can be done so immediately. Others are an investment now that are going to come to benefit you in the future. Both should be priorities, though, in my mind, not in spite of everything that we're seeing out there that's going on in the world, but because of it. And I'd highly recommend that people get started right away. If they have any questions for me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So go follow my profile, my firm's profile, and very, very easy to reach if you'd like to have a private conversation off the back of that introduction. You can also visit our website, holyoakesearch.com, and subscribe to our newsletter and our blog. And it's not intrusive, but there's some really useful information that's going to come your way sort of periodically that I think is actionable information, whether you are an active job seeker, whether you're just a career-minded procurement professional, or whether you're a hiring manager or a procurement officer, looking to establish a more effective talent acquisition and retention sort of pipeline within your business. Again, I'd love to keep in touch with everyone and reach out. Again, LinkedIn's probably the best place to start.
Okay, great. Well, what I'll do is I'll include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for the episode today, and also a link to Holyoake Search for your website. And the links in the show notes, they're going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. You will just be able to see the most recent episodes. You'll find this one with Mark, and everything is going to be on that page. So once again, that's artofprocurement.com/podcast. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your insights. I really appreciate catching up and talking to you.
Thank you, Phil. It's been an absolute pleasure to be back on the pod. Thanks for inviting me.
I want to thank you for listening in to my conversation today with Mark. So my big takeaway that I want to highlight today is the importance of personal branding, not just for being hired, but also as a key contributor to the success in hiring. I know that I've personally joined organizations on the strength of the personal brand of their CPO, and the fact is that for those procurement professionals with the most in-demand skills, the hiring market is going to remain competitive. And unless you work for a company with a top 20 corporate brand, you really need to ensure that you have a personal brand that attracts the best candidates. To subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement, and never miss an episode, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. And you can find our back catalogue of over 300 podcasts from the past 5 years at artofprocurement.com/podcast.